I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Myron Jelinski. I'm my partner at Gowling WLG Canada LLP, and I'm the co-head of our hydrogen group, together with my UK colleague, Gareth Baker. We're very excited to be hosting today's seminar on the role of hydrogen in Canada. Who would have known even a couple of months ago how many changes that would be happening in this industry? An industry that's been talked about for quite a while, but it's been increasing in terms of its development. Every week, we see something different. And today we're going to hear from a number of people who are in the industry who will give you their perspectives about the role of hydrogen in Canada. We have a large and diverse audience today from a variety of stakeholders, from producers, transmitters, advisors, financiers, governments, and others. The broad interest and the broad number of different stakeholders is indicative of the level of interest in this space currently, as well as the diversity of the stakeholders who are relevant to it. Now, a few words about Gowlings for those who don't know us quite as well. We are an international law firm with offices across Canada, Europe, and parts of the Middle East and Asia. We have a very strong sectoral focus on energy, technology, environmental, and innovation. We are a multidisciplinary group in the hydrogen group, more than 65 strong, who work with stakeholders across the spectrum in moving forward the industry and the needs of our clients. Before I introduce our speakers, just a couple of words of housekeeping and agenda. Go to the next slide, please. So here is just a quick listing of our topics which we'll be covering. Hopefully we will get to all of them. We will plan to do Q&A at the end. If we're really running out of time, I may exercise moderator's choice and curtail some of our topics, but we'll see how well we can do. This will be a recorded session and it will be available in the next few weeks on the Gowling WLG website. The Q&A button is available for questions during the presentation. We will, as I said, try to address those at the end, not to the extent we can. If we can't, then we will try to follow up with people by email. Without further ado, I want to introduce our three illustrious speakers. Dr. Grant Strem, Joy Roberts, and Rob Harvey. First, Grant. Grant is a Calgary-born geologist whose experience includes oil and gas production, reserves evaluation, and financial modeling and forecasting for large banks. Prior to co-founding Proton Technologies, Grant was involved in a number of other ventures. He also believes that clean energy tech needs to proliferate as fast as possible to dramatically improve efficiency, cost, and environmental performance of energy production. Next, Joy. So we can move to the next slide. Joy Roberts. Joy has lived and breathed fuel cells for 28 years with a lifetime goal of seeing fuel cell vehicles change the world. Her career has focused on the hydrogen fuel cell industry, spanning multiple Vancouver-based companies, working in many different roles in many departments, including R&D, product development, and prototyping development, and through applications that vary from bike lights to automotive to stationary. She has 15 granted patents related to fuel cells. Finally, Rob Harvey. Rob Harvey is responsible for business development of hydrogen production and fueling infrastructure for large-scale fuel cell electric fleets at Cummins, including commuter trains, buses, and delivery trucks. Rob has worked over 20 years in the energy sector as a former principal with PHB Hagler, Rick Bailey, and a consultant, Oliver Wyman, as well as startup ventures in waste-to-energy and biogas CHP. Warm welcome to our panelists. I've asked each of them to speak briefly about themselves and the company, starting off with Grant. Next slide, please.
Thanks very much. I'll talk briefly about Proton Technologies. It's basically on the production side of things. So the other speakers, I think, have a more of a use focus, but our goal is to make extremely low cost hydrogen at a carbon intensity that's below zero without any new ecological disturbance. And we do that by leveraging existing resources and infrastructure. Next slide, please. We began selling, right now, compressing hydrogen into tube trailers from oil fields in Saskatchewan. Our belief is that we can scale up, our next scale up will be at approximately 25 cents per kilogram hydrogen, which is rather disruptive. And the amount of resource that we have in the ground, and by that I mean oil and gas resources, where we can do this with zero emissions or actually negative emissions, is quite vast. We're looking at 10% of the world's energy supply by 2040 as our goal, which is a big goal, but we think it's achievable. Next slide, please. So one thing that people think about when they think about net zero, they think about wind and solar, for example, or wind and solar to electrolysis. But if you look at the life cycle analysis of anything, the cement, the steel, the abandonment, the transportation aspects, there is a non-zero carbon intensity associated with these. So most of the hydrogen production processes out there have a positive carbon intensity. But if part of making the hydrogen sequesters large volumes of CO2, you can have a profoundly negative intensity of the carbon. And because of the nature of our process, we have many product streams, including nitrogen and ammonia, electricity, and even potentially, in some cases, we'll do enhanced oil recovery with the extra carbon and heat in the ground. So this allows us to actually have a hydrogen cost that we could potentially give away for free at large volume, and still the whole thing is profitable. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of changes, of course, in decarbonization discussions. They've ramped up a lot over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of significant breakthroughs, such as carbon fiber over at pressure vessels. There's been a lot of focus on decarbonizing the transportation sector, which I think is great. And well, this has created a big demand, carbon taxes have helped as well, to create a huge demand for clean or low or negative carbon intensity hydrogen. And there are very few companies who are sort of pure play hydrogen companies out there. Next slide, please. So our lowest cost competitor is steam methane reforming. Sometimes that's done with carbon capture and storage. But in all cases, they have to start with natural gas, and there will be conversion losses in extracting, making a final product of hydrogen. So there will be less energy in the hydrogen resulting from the original natural gas, if natural gas is the source. By contrast, we use the oil field itself as a pressure vessel, and it comes preloaded with decades of fuel, and it's usually obtainable for free. It's an abandonment liability for someone else. When an oil field is abandoned, most of the oil is still in the ground. It's just no longer flowing economically to the wellbore. It's very easy to get the oxygen to it. Next slide, please. So what we do is inject oxygen. So we separate it from the air, inject it into the oil field. It reacts with the oil and triggers reactions that give us huge amounts of hydrogen. So this has been done 500 times around the world, always with the goal of increasing the oil production. But hydrogen has, in every single case, been a byproduct. So we have some patents around process patents around the whole thing for focusing on the hydrogen side. Next slide, please. We can also trigger reactions that trap the CO2 in the ground as carbonates. And these reactions actually give us extra hydrogen. So what's not to love? We can get the CO2 in the than anybody else because we can pull it into our oxygen using the Venturi effect, unlike the big CO2 compressors that many blue hydrogen projects are discussing. Next slide, please. So we have these massive resources. For example, the one deposit in Alberta is over 2 trillion barrels in size. And we think that we can take about 10% of Western Canada's resource and for a 50-year lifespan, supply 10% of humanity's total energy by 2040, which will take a lot of investment and build out and construction, of course. In fact, if you look at the price tag, it'll be, we think, approximately $700 billion. But compared to a $6 trillion industry, getting 10% of that is still an interesting proposition for whoever wants to help us construct it. Even if we get a fraction of our goal, you know, it's quite a compelling thing. Next slide, please. And we've got an interesting, diverse advisory board and team. There's about 60 of us, and we're happy to be transforming the cost structure and environmental performance of hydrogen production. And that's all I had prepared to say about Proton. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Grant. Interesting. And next, we're going to go to Joy.
Thank you. Can you go to the next slide? So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Unelia. Unilia Fuel Cells is an international hydrogen fuel cell stack engineering and manufacturing company at the forefront of the vehicle electrification movement. Our core competencies are on electrochemical engineering, stack design, at-scale production is led by a team of experts who are industry veterans. So we have R&D and production facilities in Canada and in China. And Unilia was built from the ground up to offer unparalleled competitive advantage through technology edge, manufacturing prowess, and most importantly, market access. The result is a synergy of East and West embodying the agility and the passion of a startup with resources and capabilities of seasoned industry contributors. Next slide, please. So where are we? We have our R&D center located in Vancouver, where I'm speaking from today. And we're in Burnaby in the heart of the fuel cell hub. We have about 45 employees here, and we now have 9 hydrogen test stations. We also have 2 sites in China. So our main manufacturing base is in Shanghai. And we also have an additional location in Foshan. We have about 150 employees and 6 hydrogen test stations in that area. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in Vancouver, this gives you sort of a synopsis of what we do here. So we do quite a range of activities going from subscale testing to characterization of the subcomponents as well as the integral components of the fuel cell. We do internal catalyst-coated membrane or CCM development. We build stack prototypes. We do what we call MEFA prototyping, and that's membrane electrode framed assembly prototyping. And we also do our own stack testing here. A lot of the research goes on in Vancouver, and then we work very closely with our partners in China. Could you go to the next slide? So this is some of the pictures from our facility here. You can see that our R&D lab where we do a lot of our ink development. And on the upper right, you can see one of our coating machines, and going down where we can do some MEFA development prototyping, and on the bottom left where we do our CCM lamination. Go to the next slide. And these are some images from our stack production facilities in Unilia, Shanghai. So some of our sealing and stack assembly and testing capabilities. Not all of it came through on the slide, sorry about that. But moving from the left, you can see where we do our automatic sealing. The center one being building our stacks, and on the far right doing the testing of our modules. Go to the next slide, please. And this is our Foshan facility where we also do elements of the stack manufacturing. And in this particular case, this is some additional sealing images. The next slide. And what applications? We're developing fuel cell stacks for mid to heavy duty vehicles. And there are some pictures here showing them being implemented into those applications. And we're very excited to see more and more of our vehicles on the road. We have 2 products out now. And our first product was the Polaris product, and that was launched in the second quarter of 2020. It's scalable to 83 kilowatts, power density of 3.5 kilowatts per liter, free startup capability to -30. We most recently launched Electra, which is our latest design, and this was just launched last month. So this was Q2 2021. It's scalable to 130 kilowatts, and looking at power densities of 4.4 kilowatts per liter, and similar free startup capability. And most recently, one of our exciting developments was that we had TÜV global certification of our stacks in a refire system. And the first stack and system to receive the TÜV certification. And what was just a nice bonus was that the measured power that they demonstrated was higher than what we were rating our stacks for. So it was a happy moment for the teams and to be able to get this accomplishment. So that's a little bit about what we do and why we're excited to see more hydrogen activity in the world and specifically in Canada.
Great, thank you very much. And last but not least, certainly, Rob, you.
Robert Harvey with Cummins. And Cummins is well known as a leading engine supplier, diesel, natural gas, hybrids, and battery electric vehicles. But we're going to talk about hydrogen today and some of the new power capabilities on the next slide. Just a quick overview. We work with OEMs of truck manufacturers, bus manufacturers, train manufacturers, and hydrogen production companies. And the gambit of technologies and products we've developed include battery electric components and powertrains, fuel cell power modules and compositions, hydrogen production, both for industrial applications, small scale turnkey systems, and large scale systems. Our Hylizer product line for large scale green hydrogen production, and also stationary fuel cells, as solid oxide fuel cells for microgrids and grid scaling. Next slide. Give you an example of some of the projects we've done in terms of transit buses for urban fleets. Railways, I'll be talking more about that with our work with Alstom, the world's first zero emission fuel cell electric train. Municipal vehicles, mining vehicles, the full gambit. Our focus is on fleets and also commercial vehicles like a Class 8 truck, a project with the California Energy Commission in California. And the nature of our contribution is always a fuel cell compositions at a minimum. And in some cases, like that commercial vehicle, the Class 8 truck, it's the full integration of the entire vehicle with the fuel cells, the batteries, the hydrogen storage, and the full integration. On the electrolysis side, we've got over 600 sites we've supplied equipment for around the world. And most of these sites are industrial hydrogen production facilities used for manufacturing and industrial processes. And in the past 10 years, an increasing number of our projects are for green hydrogen production. The one in the second there is Falkenhagen. That was one of the very first power to gas plants built in Germany, and also for the production of green chemicals and fuel for fuel cell electric vehicles. Next slide. Our value proposition is basically, we've been doing this a long time. We've got a lot of hours on our vehicles that these have been deployed. Some of the key distinctions is no need for auxiliary humidification. Fuel cells produce electricity and water, and we use the water produced naturally by a fuel cell to provide the humidification for the membranes. And that's a distinct feature that reduces the operating costs for the facility. Size and weight, lower than higher pressure systems. And one of the key wear components and aspects that affect the life of a fuel cell is not the membrane itself or the stack, but it's the air compressor component. The air compressor, compressors of any kind, are often the weakest link. Our design uses a small air blower, and its lifetime is 5 times longer than a compressor. Freeze capability and unlimited start cycles as well. Next slide. This project, I think if you really want to test the application of fuel cell vehicles, there's no better model than for a commuter train. And the Coradia iLint, which was developed by Alstom, has had trains in service since the fall of 2018. Cummins is providing the fuel cell composition. You see a picture of it there. That is the stacks, the systems for management of the hydrogen, the inverter systems, the exhaust systems, all part of an integrated package which goes on the top of the train for that. The great thing about this is from a passenger standpoint and an operator standpoint, the performance is identical to a diesel train. So in terms of having 150 passengers, the top speed of 140 kilometers per hour, the time for refueling, the only difference is it's a zero emission vehicle compared to a diesel. And compared with an overhead catenary system, it's cheaper as well. Next slide, please. Just quickly on the electrolysis side, to give you one example, and a great example in Canada is the project that was completed and commissioned in January of this year with Air Liquide. This is a 20 megawatts electrolyzer project with our Hylyzer 1000, which is a 5 megawatts platform. Produces over 8,000 kilograms a day. In this configuration, you see 4 lines of the system. One of the key distinctives is the output is 30 bar, which reduces the compression cost or you can even eliminate the need for compression for the electrolyzer plant. And this project in Air Liquide's project is being used for industrial and fuel cell vehicle customers, providing hydrogen for that. That's a very quick overview of Cummins and some of our capabilities. You can find more information on our website, cummins.com/hydrogen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate the introduction from everybody. We're going to move now to cover the areas in the agenda. So we're going to start off with opportunities. I mean, you've talked a little bit about what each of you do in your individual companies, but for our audience, where do you see the opportunities in Canada with respect to hydrogen? And that's really across blue, green, or the other colors of the rainbow. I think it's important we actually maybe level set. I'll ask Joy to start off and just actually comment on the colors of the rainbow that are relevant for those who are not quite as familiar. So Joy, over to you.
Okay, so just to get everybody on the same page, and we'll be using these color terminologies quite frequently. People may have heard of them or may not. There's gray hydrogen, which is produced from the reforming of fossil fuels without carbon capture and sequester. There's blue, which is produced by fossil fuels, by steam methane reforming or pyrolysis or other processes with carbon capture and sequestration. And there's green hydrogen produced by from producing water from electrolysis using renewable sources of energy such as hydroelectric, solar, or wind. If you do much web surfing, you're actually starting to see many other different colors, but I didn't want to get into that, so I just want to keep it simple with the 3. You may see pink, yellow, who knows, but that's where we should start.
Great, thanks for that. So maybe if you can and then add some comments to the opportunities. So do you want to start off? Or do you have any further comments on that, or should we move to Rob?
Sorry.
I wasn't sure whether you were finished or whether you had some further comments.
I thought we were okay. In terms of the opportunities, I think that everybody right now in the industry is really excited to see that the recent changes that are going on. When we started with the Paris Accord, there might have been a little bit of skepticism if that was going to be really realized in the industry. And as you alluded to at the beginning, it's a constantly changing platform that's going on, and we see announcements happening all the time. With the carbon pricing policies, Canada's hydrogen strategy, which I know we're going to talk about more later, the Clean Fuel Fund that was recently announced at the World Hydrogen Technologies Conference, and with the clean fuel standards that are coming down the way. I think that we really have to think about how we're going to approach the greenhouse gas emissions and have mixed strategies that are going to help us address this. It sounds sort of corny to say this, but I think we have to walk before we run. And so that looking at mixed solutions of both blue and green is a very viable way for us to achieve our targets. And it's going to also really depend on the local situation that we are in. If we consider the concrete elements of it, a solution that is right for, say, a province like Quebec, which has, the world's largest electrolyzer that Rob just showed, and a very substantial amount of hydroelectric power, that solution is going to be very different than for, say, someone in Grant's position in Alberta, where we're looking at some of the greatest sources of methane. And I think the opportunities for hydrogen is that we can play to our strengths, and that we're going to be able to try and utilize both the blue and the green, depending on the local situation. So
great, thank you. I guess now over to you, Rob.
Thank you. I think the biggest opportunity is what's going to use that demand is in zero emission fleets for heavy duty mobility, buses, commuter trains, and trucks. We're already seeing that with projects that are underway and being developed by Mississauga Transit and Winnipeg Transit for initial deployments of 10 fuel cell electric buses for demonstration and integration trials. We see it with Bison Transport's work in developing a project for Class 8 trucks in the Edmonton, Calgary corridor, and many others. And the exciting thing about it is that the performance, as I mentioned with the trains, but the performance for buses and for trucks as well, a one-to-one substitution with the diesel vehicle, the same refueling time, zero emission, and most importantly, from an operator standpoint, a line of sight to a total cost of ownership parity with their diesel fleets. And that's a real driver. It's not just about being green, it's an economic proposition, and that's going to be in the next 8 years, really. We're looking at 2028, some studies say as late as 2030, but we will receive the parity. The other application and opportunity for the hydrogen industry I see with blending of green hydrogen into the natural gas grid to decarbonize, and companies like Enbridge are nearly completed the first project for blending in North America. And that's another opportunity.
Great, thanks for that. Grant, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think of the opportunity is vast. So I'm a big fan of all things hydrogen, partly because I don't like air pollution. And of course, when we burn hydrocarbons, these tiny, tiny particles of air pollution that nobody talks about, nobody sees them, but they do cause chronic health problems and a lot of deaths, even in Canada. I think that whatever we can do to do zero emissions in our cities and in our country, great. But I also view a big export opportunity longer term. So if we can make hydrogen cheaper than natural gas, and we can, baseload electricity certainly becomes a big part of the mix. Blending into natural gas pipelines, of course, that's as well, although that's a challenge at the moment from a regulatory perspective. But then, our whole transportation fleet and everything can save so much money by buying this very, very low cost hydrogen. So I agree completely with Rob that it's an economic opportunity for us all. So very excited to watch how this opportunity gets taken advantage of by Canada.
So we hear about lots of opportunities, but a lot of people talk a lot about the challenges. We've been hearing about the biggest thing for quite a long time. There's still a lot of people out there saying, no, not going to happen, too complicated, too many impediments. How do you respond to that? What are the challenges? Maybe let's mix up the order a little bit. Why don't we start off with Grant here?
Sure. Yeah, one of the key challenges is in Canada in general, there's still not a regulatory clarity on whether we're allowed to put hydrogen into high pressure distribution lines. In fact, the rules say we can't. So I know that there are a lot of large midstream companies that are trying to allow that because it's harder and harder for them to attract investment and stay relevant in a steeply decarbonizing world if they're not allowed to mix in hydrogen. So as a producer, I'd like to see that happen. And that is still a big roadblock or challenge because it is the easiest way to move hydrogen around. The second easiest is, or another challenge I think is education. So people are thinking of hydrogen as this niche thing that maybe the Europeans are doing, or maybe is happening here or there. They read about it, hear about it, but there's not a lot of practical things that you can look at. You can't even really buy a hydrogen car in most of North America today. And I think that that's part of the missing ingredient for education. It's not viewed as a normal fuel. It's one of the reasons we built a hydrogen barbecue, for example. Another challenge that I see is that there's two different scales. One is focused more on transportation fuel, and one is baseload energy. So filling in the gaps between wind and solar, a turbine that's burning hydrogen can be dialed up and down. And I think it's challenging to get that out. People are talking a lot about batteries, but I guess that comes back to education. There's many facets that of challenge that can be addressed through education.
Thanks for that. I guess, Rob, do you want to comment next?
Sure. No, I would agree with Jen. Our principal challenge is not in the production of hydrogen, whether it's different options like protons for blue hydrogen or electrolytic hydrogen in Quebec, for example. The projects that have been announced, there's a lot of investment already in place. The challenge is in the infrastructure for the distribution and storage of hydrogen. And again, focusing on, for zero emission fleets, we need to build it out. We've got a good start. We're not starting from scratch. The industrial gas companies have built hydrogen infrastructure for supplying, primarily gaseous hydrogen delivery in steel tube trailers for industrial customers. There's infrastructure that's there, but if you look at the scale that we need for meaningful amounts of hydrogen for a transition to zero emission bus fleets, for example, we'll need a lot of hydrogen, and that needs to be built out. And the economies of scale in terms of building a network of infrastructure for that is where we need to get to. The challenge is if you're developing an individual project, it's very costly, especially at this stage, to build that out and get the redundancy and amortizing the cost for 10 buses is very challenging. The story gets a lot better when we look at scale economies for larger bus fleets and multiple bus fleets, for example. We need to get there, and the barrier is getting these first projects off the ground and launched so that we can begin to build that network infrastructure.
Right. What's your perspective?
Actually, I've agreed with most of my esteemed colleagues here in terms of some of the key issues. I actually think one of the key ones is the misinformation. And I don't know how many of us have had those conversations with relatives or friends that come back and there's still some public perception that, hydrogen can be more dangerous, that can still be polluting. And even when you have comments like from Elon Musk talking about fuel cells as opposed to fuel cells. So I think that bringing in the public, to bring the public on side is one of the key things to keep momentum going. As secondarily, I think the codes and standards is really essential. It may be one of, depending on your perspective, it may be one of the more challenging ones to get behind because it is very detail oriented and it needs to be to keep our safety. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we have harmonization of those codes so that we don't have to adapt and make it specific to each regional location. You don't want to have to waste the energies and time developing that. And as well, alluding a little bit what Rob said is that the Canada's hydrogen strategy estimates there's got to be a lot of investments into the hydrogen infrastructure. They were estimating $5 to $7 billion of investment, and those investors are going to be looking for return on their investment in a timely fashion. If I think of it from a fuel cell perspective, it can be a long time from when you develop a fuel cell concept before you're selling a fuel cell vehicle on the road and bringing back that income. So I think that long return on investment is also another key challenge.
Fair enough. Rob, any sort of further comments on Joy's comments? Not at this point?
Agree. Yeah.
Okay.
I would
So
agree.
there's a lot of challenges. So who's supposed to fix these? Who's supposed to help address them? Where does government fit into all this? I've heard people talk about how you've got to do it in clusters because you can't look to government. Other people say, no, government should play a role. What do you think the role of government should be? Should it be just doing policies? I mean, Grant, you talked about regulatory, and that's an obvious one from my perspective. Talked about infrastructure. And the government is very keen on building out of infrastructure. I know by way of example, the Canada Infrastructure Bank is looking at hopefully financing infrastructure in the hydrogen space. But what do you think is really what the government should be doing? Should it be helping drive demand? Should it be subsidies, tax policy? What's the right thing to do? Why don't you lead us off this time? I think we've got a slide for this.
Yeah, I can comment on this. I think many of you are probably familiar with the hydrogen strategy in Canada. It's a document that was developed over 3 years with the Government of Canada under the leadership of Natural Resources Canada, and had input from hundreds of companies, organizations, trade associations, and others, universities, and others. And it's really, they describe it as a call to action, and it really is a comprehensive view of the industry, the size of the opportunity, and what needs to be done. Next slide. Just to give an introduction on this, if you look at what are the similarities with other national strategies, and the last, as Myron said, there's a tremendous amount that's gone on in the last 12 or 18 months. Germany, Japan, and other countries have tabled national hydrogen strategies with ambitious targets. It's interesting, a core characteristics of all these strategies is economic development and recognizing what it would do for the economy, for jobs in the respective countries, and also greenhouse gas reductions. And this is true for the hydrogen strategy for Canada. And some of the key aspects in positioning Canada to become a world leading supplier of green hydrogen and fuel cell technologies, building on the great history we have with companies like Ballard and Hydrogenics, now part of Cummins, over the past several decades, and many new entrants and companies that are in that space, developing a low carbon hydrogen intensity base and infrastructure for across the country for domestic and international consumption, fueling infrastructure for vehicles, the target in 2050, a $15 billion hydrogen sector, and specific targets and opportunities for significant GHG reductions. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of these, but in terms of a framework and what would it take in terms of steps over the next 5 years and indeed out to 2050, some of the key aspects, strategic partnerships. One of the things we've touched on already on this webinar is de-risking of investments for businesses to invest in hydrogen projects and infrastructure to grow the hydrogen economies, innovation to support R&D, codes and standards, as Joy has already mentioned, for building on our existing codes and standards, and with a view for removing barriers for significant deployments of these types of projects, building awareness, regional blueprints. This is a key, recognizing the different attributes and strengths across the country for different types of hydrogen development. And in the hydrogen economy, one size certainly doesn't fit all. And in Canada, we have the breadth and opportunities really covering all the bases. Next slide. We've touched on this. I think one of the key things is recognizing that the study recognized is that across Canada, we're already have accomplished a great deal, not only with exports of hydrogen technologies around the world, but in terms of projects. And just give a very quick example of some of the things that were highlighted in this hydrogen strategy. The rollout of 10 public fueling stations in BC. In Alberta, there's several projects in terms of development of blue hydrogen and including the carbon capture and sequestration. In Manitoba, the Winnipeg Transit I've mentioned, looking at fuel cell bus deployments. In Ontario, we've had the 2.5 megawatt power to gas plant, the first in North America, that's been operating for over 3 years, led by Enbridge and Cummins, and also the evaluation of transit projects like Mississauga Transit and others. Quebec, we've had several projects, one completed with Air Liquide, other projects announced for large-scale electrolytic green hydrogen production for chemical productions and biofuels, and feasibility studies in the Maritimes. Next slide. The infrastructure goes beyond transportation for fuel, but includes heat for buildings and industry, and also in blending in the natural gas infrastructure, and also looking in the power side as well. Next slide. I'm on the board, Cummins is a member, and I'm on the board of the Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association. So I want to put a quick plug in for there. And you can see from these companies, it covers the full value chain from production companies, technology companies, utilities, project developers, universities, legal firms, consultants in the hydrogen space. And the thing to note is, in less than a year, we've gone from 58 members to 107 members today, almost 100% increase. And it really just shows that the momentum and interest and growing interest in the hydrogen space and industry in Canada. Next slide. There are also provinces that develop their own hydrogen strategies. I need to update this slide. British Columbia did one of the first hydrogen studies in 2019. They just last week introduced their hydrogen strategy as well. Quebec has got a white paper on hydrogen and identified $15 million of support of green hydrogen projects. Ontario introduced its low carbon hydrogen strategy discussion paper last November and has had a hydrogen strategy working group since then in developing this the hydrogen strategy, looking to leverage the strengths in terms of the electrical generation mix and the natural gas infrastructure in Ontario. And Alberta incorporated hydrogen was a key part of their natural gas vision and strategy released in October of last year. Next slide. One final note, at the World Hydrogen Technologies Conference in Montreal a couple of weeks ago, Minister O'Regan announced the $1.5 billion Clean Fuels Fund. And this is an exciting project, one for the scale of it and the breadth. And if you look at, involves hydrogen directly, but many of the other types of eligible clean fuels like renewable diesel and other biofuels for aviation and renewable natural gas will in many cases involve the production of clean hydrogen, either blue or green hydrogen. And so the eligibility for companies in the hydrogen space is very high indeed. It includes funding for FEED studies, eligibility up to 50%, and for projects as well. And these projects need to be commissioned by March of 2026. That's a highlight of the space for hydrogen strategy in Canada and the provinces, and it's an exciting time.
Great, thanks for that. And Joy, Grant, we've talked about a lot about the sort of the policies and strategies. Bob's done a great job of taking us through those. What's your perspective? What should the government be doing? Is that enough? Should they be doing more? Should they be lending? What's the way to go?
I'll jump in if I can.
Yep.
So I think there's three things I'd like to see added. One is letting everyone know that we are going to start blending hydrogen into natural gas pipelines, even if it's 1%, just a number, and we can review it and escalate it through time. But having that clarity would be good, and tied to that would be new pipelines, whether for oil and gas, should be hydrogen compatible. The overall cost for installing a pipeline with the proper metallurgy for hydrogen is very, very similar to non-hydrogen. So it's better to just future-proof ourselves. I'd also like to see, in Canada, there's, well, I guess everywhere, there's the carrot and there's the stick. Which do you use too much? If you use the stick too much, you kill off the interest. But carrots, I think, can nourish and build a healthier outcome. So I'd like to see a little bit more carrot and a little less stick. But while sticks are effective, but carrots actually, in terms of curbing CO2 emissions, but carrots to build out hydrogen, then you have something. There's an incentive to go construct something large. And so I think more carrots for hydrogen would be good. And then I also think that the model where General Motors, for example, pays Tesla for the government sets some sort of a standard. You should have this much emissions per vehicle or something. And General Motors is above that and Tesla's below that. So then there was a money transfer directly to supporting from sort of the more, the less desired status to the more desired status. And I think that transfer of funds helped build out the more desired status faster. And if there was a sliding scale on carbon intensity related to that, of carbon intensity of the hydrogen production by life cycle analysis, I think that would be an additionally helpful tool to meet the Paris Agreement, all of these different decarbonization goals. It should further incentivize the most, the lowest carbon intensity hydrogen production methods. I guess Well,
before we get to Joy, I have to ask, describe the carrot. What kind of carrot would you suggest?
I think that there could be a few things. Loans, so that can always be something that helps people say, wow, here's an opportunity to build out a new sector, gain early market share, things like that. And it shouldn't all go to the large incumbent energy companies just because they're there. I'd rather see many, many small hydrogen businesses try their unique things. And some of them will work out great and some of them won't. But on average, I think there's a much better outcome per dollar in the long term for Canada if we distribute it a lot among many, many smaller companies. So I'd like to see, I guess, lots of small carrots as opposed to a few mega carrots for some of the incumbents.
Fair enough. Joy, what's your perspective? Joy is nodding in agreement, it looks like.
Yeah, well, I do like the carrot. Another potential carrot I could see is that we start to de-risk some of the investment risk by creating dedicated demand for the hydrogen, and perhaps incentivizing it by basing it on demonstrated capacity as opposed to any sales of hydrogen, so that people are encouraged to bring that additional capacity and make that more available so we get more adopters. I would also like to see the continuation of subsidies for early adopters in terms of the fuel cell vehicles. While we have some programs in BC and some programs in Quebec, I'd like to see more of that. So some carrots there. I'd like to see maybe some barriers to bringing the electrolysis online, like in BC, for example, the BC Hydro announced lowering the rates of being introduced into the grid. And then maybe lastly, well, I'd also like to see more incentives regarding the heavy duty transport. As Rob talked about it, that there should be an economic case in that area. And we see the targets for the light duty vehicles, but I'd like to see more emphasis on the heavy duty vehicles. And lastly, perhaps, the concern I have is a little bit on political landscape. Well, we have policies and we have guidance. What happens if we change governments, and we just need security of policy going forward? So in fact, some cases, I think, we need more legislation like we are starting to develop. So.
Wow, that's quite a few. Rob, you started off. Do you have any further comments you want to add, or disagreements with what you've heard from Grant and Joy?
Oh, I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't disagree at all. Maybe just to add to Joy's comments, I think the theme is de-risking, right? There are many players and companies in Canada today that are investing in R&D and demonstration projects. The technology is ready, and there's many groups that want to deploy zero emission fuel cell electric fleets. And the programs are coming. The two further suggestions that I would make, one aspect of de-risking is, and touching on what Joy's already said, if you had a take or pay structure for some of the hydrogen production and supply, and a bit of either a government incentive or a backstop would help do that, because you need to get these projects financed, and that's a crucial way to do it. We saw, in the development of the renewable energy business and wind and solar, feed-in tariffs is basically, if you've got a fundable project that you can get the financeable project, a take or pay contract on the hydrogen side would certainly help that. The other thing is, when we look at deployment of fleets, well, you need the vehicles and you need the fueling infrastructure. And today, there are a lot of good government programs that are getting started, that are in place, they're under discussion, but they're in two silos. And recognizing you need both to get these projects off the ground. You can invest a lot of time getting fueling infrastructure support, but if you haven't got the vehicles, where are you? So I think looking at it the way the developers they need both, and having a program that combines both and aligns with that requirement will certainly help and speed the adoption of zero emission trials and indeed transition to zero emission fleets.
Great, thanks. Let's move to international very, very briefly, since I'd like to leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, although we may go slightly over time. So international, if you had talked to people a couple of months ago, they'd said, well, Canada's behind, we're really not at the forefront. I know, Rob, you and I had this discussion. You're like, well, that's changed. In the last 3 months, that's changed. But can you provide a little bit of comments comparing and contrasting Canada versus international? Maybe, Grant, you can lead us off.
Sure, I'll be happy to. So Proton is a global business. We've got patents in over 100 countries and sold licenses in more than 20. So there's, I guess I just got back from Dubai, for example. I've seen a lot of, I get calls from all over the world on a regular basis. And I think that there's a few key changes or differences that I see from one place to the next. Europe seems to be leading the charge, and actually anywhere where government procurement is doing an approach of do as I do, not as I, well, here we're saying do as I say, not as I do. But if your procurement requires you to have garbage trucks that are running on hydrogen, or buses, or all these types of municipal or governmental transport solutions that are running on hydrogen, then that helps backstop things. It normalizes it for the region, and it shows everybody the seriousness of it. So it becomes like sort of a hyperdrive thing. If you're heating your buildings with hydrogen, well, then it gets a lot easier for other people to look at that and say, okay, I guess the government's serious, and there is a path. So that's one that I've noticed. I think there's also a difference in culture. A lot of the European companies are somewhat more interrelated, or maybe that's not the right way. I guess if the government says we're going to do this, I've noticed this trend, and I'm not sure exactly why it is, but if you're in Norway and the government says we're going to go to hydrogen, a lot of people go, oh yeah, that makes sense. There's hydrogen fueling stations around us, and there's, we're running a ferry on hydrogen, and it's just a normal part of, we all know that that's what we're going to do, and that's where we're going. But here, I feel like there's a lot of trying to buck the trend. So in terms of the, you can't tell me how to, what type of fuel to use. And if I want to make air pollution, I'll make air pollution. And I'm not sure why there's such this, I think, active resistance to change. People fear losing their jobs in oil and gas. Although, some providers like us hire oil and gas types of skill sets for making hydrogen from oil fields. But there's a very, a big difference. So we're not even investing hard on average in Canada towards hydrogen and decarbonization solutions. But the average retail investor knows that they want to put their money into these types of things. Even like for us, about probably 20 of our shareholders work for Saudi Aramco. So like reservoir engineers and stuff like that, they all see which way the wind is blowing. And I don't know, I guess there's fueling stations is a part of it, normalizing it, educating people. So building a hydrogen barbecue, you can use hydrogen as a fuel. People here are still asking questions about the Hindenburg and things like that. So how do we normalize it? I think vehicles are a big part of that education.
Okay, fair enough. Rob, let's hear from you and your perspective.
I think just to mention again, the lead that we've got in Canada with Canadian Technologies, a lot of what's going on around the world is based on what's been developed in Canada. And I mentioned the Craddy Islands. I mentioned the PEM electrolysis and some of the work on that. What I don't think I mentioned is all of the R&D, product development, manufacturing for both of those major product lines is based in the Hydrogen Fuel Cell and Technologies Group in Mississauga, Ontario. And we've got two other panelists in terms of technology, developers. There are many more in Canada. And what the good part is, we are ahead in many respects in terms of technology. We have been, and we still are today. What is gratifying to see that on the infrastructure side in Canada, and we've done that without having tremendous amount of activity in those projects in Canada. But now on the infrastructure side, that's catching up with vehicles, with hydrogen production, blue and green hydrogen production. And that is really that's a virtuous cycle, because the more that experience we have and the more capabilities that we develop and leverage these projects in Canada, we're even better positioned to do larger projects and more projects globally as well. So I think that's the key difference that Canada has with other parts in the country. The other key difference I see is that we're not looking to import hydrogen. We have got, we've just seen discussion on the webinar today, many opportunities in places like Alberta and Quebec and Ontario and BC to produce substantial amounts of hydrogen, far more than we can use ourselves, and for export as well. And when you look at a lot of the European roadmaps and designs, they're looking at, okay, how can we import hydrogen? And that's a key difference in Canada.
Great, thanks. Joy?
So one word that Grant mentioned that really resonates for me when I think about the leadership is the ability to inspire change. So internationally, I've seen two aspects of what we can learn from in inspiring that change and leadership. And through my years in fuel cell technology, really California started us off when they first brought in their regulations of bringing in zero emission vehicles, and people started to change the way they thought and get serious in terms of bringing that technology in. And that was in 1990. And they've continued that, and they've also tuned their policies as they've gone along. Another big example for me, and it's close to our heart because we work so closely with our colleagues, is China. And don't worry, I won't go into discussion of Chinese policies because that would take up the rest of the time and probably another few hours. But they have inspired change. And I think that in terms of leadership, that is exciting. And they're not afraid to make changes when they see a policy is going in the wrong direction. So they had an example of where they're doing vehicle subsidies and they have people building golf carts with fuel cell engines. But that's not putting more vehicles on the road. That's not getting more hours on there. So when they tune their policies, they're able to now get more vehicles on the road and people incentivized to rent those vehicles when they're not using them. So again, getting more hours of the behavior that they want to see, as well as Rob talked about the leadership that we have in Canada, and I think that's a huge asset. But I also look to internationally, I see some of the things China's doing, one, attracting some of the talent that we have here and purchasing, products from Canadian companies to be realized in China. But they're also developing their own capabilities in terms of technology, and they have incentives around that, such as their high-tech status opportunities where they can lower their tax burden by developing more intellectual property and as well doing more R&D. And so that's another opportunity that I think Canada has seen in terms of their leadership, but also can learn more from international companies. So yeah.
Great, no, thank you for that. We're running low on time. We're going to try to do another 5 minutes of Q&A. Hopefully people can stay on. I think I'm going to skip out my last question for the panelists so we can go to Q&A. So the first question was, how pure does the hydrogen need to be to feed your fuel cell reliably? I think it's a question for both you, Nelia, and for Cummins. For Joy and for Rob, how pure?
So it has to be quite pure, and I guess it's in terms of if you need the percentage of hydrogen, that can be variable, and you may have different types of systems which provide a range going between 100% going down to lower percentages like 70. But sometimes specific contaminants can be very damaging to the fuel cells, such as if I pick sulfur, there can be very, very low particulates or low ppm levels of those type of contaminants, and it varies quite greatly.
Well,
generally, when you look at the numbers, it would be at least 4 nines, 99.99% pure. And well, we can get there both with green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is 5 nines right out of the electrolyzer. With blue hydrogen, through pressure swing absorption or through liquefaction, you can get the purity required for fuel cells as well. And I agree with Joy that there are some contaminants to especially watch, but we've got pathways to get to the clean hydrogen we need to provide that.
great, thanks. Next question. With the enhanced focus of the Biden administration on the expansion of a U.S. high-speed rail grid and the announcement last week of a proposed HSR link between Calgary, Red Deer, and Edmonton, what is the potential for hydrogen to be used as the motive fuel? I want to take that one on.
I think I can start with that one. If you look at, we have it today. The Karate Island's the first zero emission fuel cell train. It's been operating in Germany since 2018, as I mentioned, and that is at the commuter rail scale. So it's filled, it's got gaseous hydrogen filling, and for commuter rail, we're there today. The big potential for hydrogen fuel cell rail versus the electrification alternative is overhead catenary systems, which are very expensive to build. The overhead wire systems that are more common in Europe than they are in North America. And the length of time to build the catenary system, the disruption of roadworks, raising bridges, et cetera, to provide that. It's actually the first fuel cell mobility application that you've got a viable business case today. So I'm not familiar with the Biden announcement, but for large-scale regional rail with a commuter rail we're there today. I think for locomotives is a little farther off, but certainly for commuter rail, it is a viable alternative today, and the economics are favorable as well.
Quick follow-up, Rob. I think this one's also for you. H2 train fill is the same as for regular train. Is that liquid or high pressure?
For the Cariati Island, it's 350 bar gaseous. There's a lot of real estate on the top of the train, if you like, just like a bus for filling that. There's a number of companies that are looking at fuel cell power systems for locomotives. And for locomotives, it could well be liquid on board. Given if you're going cross country, certainly in North America's network, for the distance and the amount of energy that's required, liquid may be an option for locomotives. Great.
So our final question, what jurisdictions around the world can kind of look to for inspiration and guidance for public policy on hydrogen? Who wants to take that one? Or are we now such a leader that everybody else can look to us? Grant, you look thoughtful. I'm going to ask you to go to lead on that one.
I think there's a lot of good peripheral approaches in the electrification movement that can come across to what we're doing or trying to achieve with hydrogen. So an example of that would be, for example, GM paying Tesla. Well, in the hydrogen space, if we're producing or selling diesel, maybe some of that could help, finance the build out of hydrogen. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good peripheral concepts in electrification internationally.
Joy?
I guess I took that question a little bit different in the sense that I saw jurisdiction as perhaps regional versus the federal in terms of mandate. And I think that BC and Quebec are really coming with some excellent policies in terms of getting their hydrogen policies on there and working towards, like for example, BC working towards being self-sustaining in terms of their electrical demand. So I think that there's some opportunities there to look at some of the changes. I also mentioned in terms of like BC Hydro trying to lower some of the barriers to bringing electrolysis into the grid. So I think that there's some good work coming out of BC.
Rob?
No.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, as you said from the top, if you'd asked the question, 12 months ago, you might get a different answer. But I'm very encouraged by the policies and specifically the programs like the Clean Fuel Funds that the Canadian government has announced, and there have been provincial announcements as well that bode well for the development of hydrogen infrastructure and the rollout of these initial projects for heavy duty mobility, for example. When you look at other parts of the world, Korea, Germany, China, I think the difference is the amount of money in terms of, government investment that's going to it. Very high, some very big numbers like $9 billion euros in the case of Germany. But I think in terms of where we're at in Canada and what's been accomplished and with some of these announcements and get projects underway, we're doing well. And it's a very exciting time to be in the hydrogen space in Canada.
Great, thank you for that. Well, that moves us towards a wrap up. As Bob very aptly put it, very exciting to be in the hydrogen industry at this point in time. I mean, you've brought lots of issues, lots of opportunities, challenges, spots where government can go. But overall, it seems like a very, very positive session today. It looks like you're all sort of very, very excited that this is really gathering momentum, and we look forward to continuing to gather momentum. So on that note, I want to thank our panelists for taking the time to bring their expertise and their perspectives to us. I want to thank our audience as well for participating. We here at Gallings are very excited to be involved in this space. We look forward to doing more in this space. And frankly, stay tuned for more webinars and podcasts from us on hydrogen. So thank you very much for everybody, and good day.